You're pure trash. That's how President Donald Trump opened the hearing. 3 words, spit out like venom. But those 3 words weren't just an insult. They were the spark that lit a fire in Congress. In a room packed with over 300 cameras, millions of Americans watched as Trump, the 47th president, tried to crush Jasmine Crockett, the woman some now call the warrior of justice. For more than 4 hours, the two clashed with a fury rarely seen in U.S. politics. Insults turned into weapons, truths into blades, and every exchange cut deeper than the last. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a battlefield, where one voice stood for power and the other for justice. And it all began with those 3 words. The room went silent, as if every breath had been stolen at once. You're pure trash. Trump's voice didn't echo. It thundered, heavy and deliberate, drowning out the shuffle of papers, the clicking of pens, the faint coughs of the audience. Every camera in the chamber locked onto him. Every microphone trembled, hungry for the next sound. And at the center of that storm stood Jasmine Crockett, her eyes sharp, her fists clenched, her silence heavier than his insult. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might let it go. For a heartbeat, Trump looked smug, lips curling with the satisfaction of a man convinced he had already won. But then Jasmine rose. Her chair scraped against the floor, screeching like steel across stone. She straightened her back, met Trump's gaze, and when she spoke, her words cracked the air like a whip. Trash? She repeated, her voice steady, but her eyes blazing. You dare call me trash while you sit there, the most corrupt president in modern history? You hide behind power, behind money, behind lies, and you think I'm the garbage in this room? Gasps rippled across the chamber. Reporters jolted forward, pens racing, cameras flashing. Some senators exchanged uneasy glances. Others smirked, waiting for Trump's reply. The man did not wait long. He shot out of his chair, his hands slamming the table with a force that made the microphones jump. You don't get to lecture me, Crockett, he roared. You're a disgrace, a loud, angry nobody who's lucky I even let you speak in my presence. But Jasmine was not flinching. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through his like a blade through silk. Lucky? No, Mr. Trump, you're lucky. Lucky that this country still gives you the privilege of sitting in that chair. Lucky that justice hasn't yet dragged you out of here in handcuffs. Lucky that I even bother to answer you instead of letting history do it for me. Her words hit harder than any gavel. Even the walls seemed to close in, pressing every syllable against the ears of those present. Trump's face flushed crimson, his jaw tightening. History, he spat. History will remember me as the strongest leader this nation has ever had. You'll be a footnote, a pathetic footnote. Jasmine smirked, a smile not of amusement, but of defiance. You're right, she said, her voice low, deliberate, dangerous. History will remember you. It will remember the chaos you unleashed, the violence you incited, the lies you spread. And it will remember that in this very room, in this very moment, you finally met someone who would not bow, not break, and not be silent. The chamber erupted, whispers, gasps, muffled laughter, even a few claps before the gavel pounded for silence. The tension had transformed into spectacle. The hearing was no longer routine, it was war. Trump pointed a finger at Jasmine, his hand trembling not from weakness, but from fury. You're nothing, he snarled. You're noise, you're chaos. You're beneath me. But Jasmine took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. If I'm noise, she said, her voice rising, then hear me loud. If I'm chaos, then feel me shake this room. And if I'm beneath you, Mr. Trump, then why does the whole world lean forward every time I speak? The audience froze. For the first time, Trump hesitated, not long, not enough to admit defeat, but long enough for the cameras to capture it. That flicker of doubt, that fracture in his armor. Jasmine pressed on, relentless. You can insult me. You can scream at me. You can throw every name in your dictionary at me, but you can't silence me, and you can't silence the truth. Trump opened his mouth, but no sound came. Just a shallow breath, ragged with rage. Jasmine turned slightly, her voice now aimed at the room, not just the man before her. This isn't about me. It isn't about him. It's about justice, and justice does not bow to power. The gavel slammed again, but no one heard it. All eyes were locked on the two figures, one a titan of arrogance and power, the other a warrior of justice and fire. It was no longer a hearing. It was a duel. And everyone in America knew they had just witnessed the first strike. If you want to see how battles of truth and power collide, make sure you subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every story burns with justice and no voice is left unheard. The echoes of that first explosion still lingered in the chamber when Trump leaned forward, eyes blazing. The smirk was gone. The patience was gone. What remained was raw, unfiltered rage. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the microphones. "You will not twist this into some pathetic morality play. I am the President of the United States, and I don't take lectures from bottom feeders like you." The words crashed over the room like thunder. Staffers flinched. Reporters scrambled to catch every syllable. Senators whispered behind their hands, some amused, some uneasy. Trump didn't stop. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his whole body leaning across the table as though he might lunge at her. "You sit there pretending to care about justice when all you do is grandstand. You're nothing but a fraud, Crockett, a fraud who hides behind fake outrage and cheap theatrics." Gasps filled the chamber. Some in the audience clapped nervously, others shook their heads. The noise swelled into a storm, the hearing already far from order. And then Jasmine laughed, not a nervous laugh, not a polite laugh, a sharp, deliberate laugh that sliced through the chaos like glass shattering on marble. "You call me a fraud?" she shot back, her voice rising above the roar. "Coming from the man who's built his entire career on lies, on bankruptcies, on scandals, on broken promises? You want to talk about fraud, Mr. Trump? Look in the mirror. That's the biggest fraud America's ever seen." The chamber erupted again. Shouts, groans. The pounding of the gavel drowned beneath the frenzy. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was gladiatorial combat, and the crowd was tasting blood. Trump's face twisted, a cocktail of fury and disbelief. "You dare," he started, but Jasmine cut him off, her words merciless. "Yes, I dare," she said, her tone fierce, each syllable honed to a blade. "You think volume equals truth. You think power erases accountability. You think screaming louder makes your lies more believable. But here, today, in front of every camera, in front of every American watching, your arrogance is collapsing in real time." Trump slammed his fist against the desk so hard the microphones jolted. "I am the law in this country," he thundered. "You wouldn't even be in this room without my leadership. You'd still be begging for scraps from the sidelines." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "You're right about one thing," she fired back. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Because it's your corruption that brought me here. It's your lies, your abuse, your arrogance that made this necessary. Every insult you hurl only proves why I'm standing across from you and why millions are praying for me to win this fight." The noise in the chamber swelled again, deafening now, the crowd reacting as though it were a stadium. Cameras flashed like lightning strikes. Every network already had its headline: Crockett versus Trump. The gloves are off. Trump leaned back, sneering, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. He tried to mask it with bravado, his words dripping with venom. "You think you're a savior, but you're nothing. You'll leave this room forgotten, and I'll leave it celebrated." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice low, her gaze unbreakable. "You'll leave this room remembered, yes, but not for strength, not for leadership, for disgrace, for cowardice, for being the man who finally met a truth he couldn't bury." The gavel pounded, the judge's voice echoing, but it was drowned in the chaos. The chamber wasn't just a hearing room anymore. It was an arena, and every insult, every counterattack was another strike of the blade. Trump growled, his words swallowed in the noise. Jasmine didn't flinch. She raised her voice one last time in that moment, piercing through the storm. "This is not your kingdom, Mr. Trump. This is not your stage. This is America's courtroom, and here power doesn't roar. It answers." The audience froze. The roar softened into stunned silence. For the first time that day, Trump's glare faltered. And in that silence, Jasmine Crockett had turned his challenge back on him, exposing the arrogance, the hollowness, the unraveling of a man who had never been told no. The battle had only begun, but the arena was already shaking. Trump surged forward again, veins standing out on his neck, his voice thundering with unrelenting rage. "She's nothing but a disruptor," he roared, stabbing the air with his hand like a spear. "She came here not for justice, not for truth, but to tear down this nation's greatness, to smear the office of the President of the United States." The words boomed through the chamber, each syllable like cannon fire. His face was flushed crimson, spit flying with every shout, his chest heaving like a beast cornered, but unwilling to bow. "You don't belong in this room, Jasmine," he screamed. "You don't deserve this platform. You are chaos, while I am order. You are weakness, while I am power. I am the voice of America. And you—" He paused, glaring at her with pure hatred, his voice dropping to a venomous growl. "You are nothing." Gasps rippled across the audience. Even those loyal to him shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if realizing the ground beneath them was starting to crack. For a split second, the room held its breath. And then Jasmine moved. She rose slowly, deliberately, her hands steady, her gaze unflinching. Every eye turned toward her, every camera lens zoomed in, and with one swift motion, she lifted a folder, thick with pages, and slammed it onto the desk so hard it echoed like a gunshot. The chamber went silent. "This," she said, her voice like steel slicing the air, "is the truth you fear." She tore the folder open, pulling out the first document. Numbers, signatures, dates, irrefutable proof. And she didn't just hold it high for the cameras. She shoved it forward, her finger stabbing the page, her eyes locked on Trump. "You want to call me a disruptor?" she spat. "You want to call me chaos? Then explain this. Explain how millions of dollars vanished under your watch. Explain the deals, the payoffs, the betrayals of the very people you swore to serve." The room gasped again, louder this time, the sound like a wave crashing against stone. Even the judge leaned forward, straining to see. Trump tried to laugh, a sharp, forced bark that rang hollow. "Fake, all fake, fabricated garbage by people who hate me. You've got nothing, Crockett, nothing." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped closer, slamming the papers down again, her words cutting like whips. "Nothing? Then why does your signature sit at the bottom of this page? Why do your allies scramble to cover it up? Why does every trail of deceit lead straight back to you?" She jabbed her finger at him, her voice blazing with fury. "You call me chaos, but the only chaos here is the wreckage you've left behind. And today the world finally sees it." The crowd erupted. Shouts, screams, frantic clapping from some, furious denials from others. Reporters scrambled over each other to capture every syllable, their fingers flying across keyboards like sparks. Trump's face hardened, his fists clenching, his words stumbling out in raw fury. "You dare bring this circus here? You think that paper means anything against me? I built empires, I won elections. I carried this country on my back." His voice cracked on the last word, a fracture he couldn't conceal. Jasmine's reply came like a dagger. "You built castles of sand. You won by lies. And you carried nothing but your own ego." Her words echoed, filling the chamber with a stillness so sharp it almost cut. For the first time, the noise quieted. The audience leaned in, straining for every syllable. "This is not about politics," she continued, her voice calm now, deliberate, deadly. "This is about truth, and the truth is something you've run from your entire life. But today you can't run. Not from me, not from this." She held the document high again, her arm unshaking, her eyes never leaving his. "This is the beginning of your reckoning." Trump sat back, his jaw tight, his face frozen in a mask of rage and disbelief. But his silence screamed louder than his shouts had moments before. The chamber pulsed with tension, the air thick, suffocating, electric. Everyone knew it. This fight had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. The confrontation was no longer just words, no longer just theater. It was war, evidence against power, truth against arrogance, one voice against the weight of an empire. And as the gavel struck futilely for order, the world leaned closer to their screens, knowing the battle had entered its most dangerous stage yet. Trump leaned back in his chair now, his chest still heaving, but his lips curling into a sneer. The fury dimmed just enough to give way to something more insidious, mockery. He chuckled, low at first, then louder, the kind of laugh that dripped contempt. Look at her, he said, pointing straight at Jasmine as if she were a spectacle. She thinks she's the voice of justice. But you want to know the truth? He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cruel delight. She's a failure, a woman with nothing, broken family, broken dreams, clinging to this stage for relevance. Jasmine Crockett is not a fighter. She's a fraud dressed up in righteous anger. The chamber murmured again, this time with discomfort. The insult had shifted, no longer political, it was personal. You've been abandoned, haven't you? Trump continued, his tone tightening the knife. No one trusts you. No one believes you. Even your so-called allies roll their eyes when you talk. You're just noise, Jasmine. Noise that nobody takes seriously. The words landed like hammers, calculated to crack her armor, to crush her from the inside. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about breaking her spirit. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She let the silence hang, let his words echo in the chamber, like venom waiting to be neutralized. Then she rose, steady as stone, her expression unreadable, except for the fire flickering in her eyes. Finished? She asked, her voice calm, almost gentle. The question cut deeper than a scream. Trump blinked, thrown for a moment, before his smirk returned. Not even close. Jasmine tilted her head, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Good, she said, because now it's my turn. She stepped forward, each movement deliberate, as if she were closing the distance not just in space but in dominance. Her voice sharpened, words slicing the air like razors. You think my life is your weapon? You think dragging my name, my history, my pain through the mud makes me weak? She pointed directly at him, her eyes blazing. It makes me unstoppable. Because unlike you, I don't hide from my scars. I wear them. They remind me who I fight for and why I will never bow to men like you. The audience erupted in gasps again. The sharp contrast between his sneers and her defiance electrified the room. Jasmine didn't stop. Broken family, she continued, her voice steady but rising with each word. Yes, and yet I stand here stronger for it, stripped of illusions, armored by truth. What about you, Mr. President? What scars do you hide? What demons keep you awake at night while you pretend to be untouchable? Trump's face reddened instantly, his jaw tightening. For the first time, the mockery faltered. You want to laugh at me? Jasmine pressed, her voice cutting clean through his bluster. Then laugh at yourself first, the man who claims greatness but crumbles under a single document of truth. The man who screams power but hides behind insults because he has nothing else left. The words hit like blows. Each sentence stripped away another layer of his arrogance, leaving raw anger beneath. Trump slammed his fist on the desk, his voice booming again. Lies, all lies, you're pathetic. But his face betrayed him, the twitch in his jaw, the desperate flare in his eyes. She had gotten to him. Jasmine leaned in closer, her voice dropping low, intimate, deadly. Pathetic? No, Mr. Trump. The only pathetic thing here is your fear. You fear truth. You fear exposure. And right now, you fear me. The room trembled under the weight of her words. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of pens scratching desperately on paper. Every person present knew they were witnessing a moment that would etch itself into history. The psychological battle was no longer subtle. It was a war of spirits, a clash of wills so fierce that every word felt like a blow to the gut. Trump leaned back, trying to smirk again, but his flushed face betrayed the pressure he was under. The gavel struck once more, but the sound was swallowed by the tension that coiled around the chamber like smoke. Two opponents stood locked in a silent war, neither yielding, neither breaking. The string was pulled so tight it could snap at any second, and every viewer, glued to their screens, felt it deep in their bones. This was no longer just politics. This was survival. The war of words had become a war of souls, and the world would not look away. If you believe truth deserves a voice louder than power, make sure you subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every clash is told without fear And every story reminds us that justice is never silent. The silence after Jasmine's last words seemed to linger like smoke, choking the chamber. And then, for the first time in the entire hearing, Donald Trump faltered. His mouth opened, but no words came immediately. His eyes darted down at the desk, then at the cameras, then back at Jasmine, as if searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. The mighty roar that had carried him through decades of controversy stuttered into a hesitation, a single fractured breath that betrayed what he most wanted to hide: doubt. The world saw it. The cameras caught it. The myth of invincibility cracked. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She struck. "This," she declared, raising a fresh document, "is the contract you signed, the trail you buried, the evidence you thought would never surface." The papers snapped sharply in her hand as she waved them for all to see. The chamber gasped again. The name printed on the page glared back like a spotlight: Donald J. Trump. The president's face twisted. "That's nothing," he barked. "Old papers, irrelevant, a smear campaign. You're all eating out of the hands of liars." But his words came too fast, tumbling over one another, clumsy and desperate. The confidence was gone. What came out was rage, raw, unfiltered, and uncontrolled. "Bullshit!" he suddenly screamed, slamming his palm on the desk so hard the microphone shrieked. "Every damn word she says is bullshit!" The curse cracked through the chamber like a whip. Gasps echoed, reporters froze, pens suspended in midair. Even his allies shifted, wide-eyed as the President of the United States bellowed profanities on live broadcasts. Jasmine stood unfazed, letting the storm burn itself out. When the echo of his curse finally died, she leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp enough to pierce through the chaos. "The louder you scream," she said, each word deliberate, unshakable, "the weaker you look." It landed like a thunderclap. The audience erupted, some in cheers, some in outrage, but all riveted by the sight of the once untouchable president being stripped bare, his fury exposed as fear. Trump lurched to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You, shut your damn mouth! You don't talk to me like that! I'm the president! I am the president!" His voice cracked again, and that crack carried more power than any insult Jasmine could have delivered. It was the sound of a man straining to convince not the world, but himself. Jasmine didn't flinch. She rose too, matching his height, her presence filling the room with a force that seemed to outshine the man who once towered over everyone. "Titles don't protect you from truth," she fired back. "Power doesn't shield you from accountability. You hide behind the words, 'I am the president,' as if it makes you untouchable. But here, today, it makes you answerable." The chamber quaked with energy. The clash no longer just verbal, it was seismic. Trump's hands shook visibly as he jabbed his finger at the documents. "Fake! Fake garbage! A witch hunt!" he yelled again, voice hoarse, desperate. But the room didn't buy it. The reporters' pens scratched faster. The cameras zoomed closer. The whispers swelled into a tide. The spell of invulnerability he had wielded for years was unraveling thread by thread, right in front of millions. Jasmine's eyes never left his. "You've built your empire on intimidation," she said, her voice steady, cutting through his shouts like a blade. "But intimidation ends where truth begins. And right now, the truth is bleeding through every crack in your armor." Trump's face reddened deeper, his jaw clenched tight, his fist pounding the desk again and again, as if brute force could glue back the pieces of his shattering facade. But the more he roared, the clearer it became. The mask of the unbreakable president was slipping. The myth of the man who could never be cornered, never be challenged, never be broken, was collapsing in real time. And the world watched, breathless, as Jasmine Crockett stood tall, the calm eye in the hurricane of his unraveling power. The image of invincibility was gone. In its place stood something far more dangerous for him: vulnerability. And once the world saw it, there would be no way to unsee it. The fracture widened in real time. Trump slammed both fists against the desk, the wood rattling under the force, his face contorted with rage, his voice exploding into a guttural roar. "This is a sham, a disgrace. You don't get to talk to me like that. I'm the President of the United States. The gavel struck desperately for order, but the sound was drowned beneath his screaming. Every microphone crackled with the weight of his fury, his shouts spilling into millions of homes like thunder. Lies! All lies! He bellowed, the veins in his neck bulging as he leaned forward. You're nothing! You're nobody! You stand here because I let you. Without me, you're dust. The chamber shook with the sheer force of his meltdown. Reporters scrambled to capture every second, cameras flashing like lightning, every lens locked on the unraveling of the most powerful man in the nation. But amid the chaos, Jasmine did not move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. When the echo of his howl finally broke against the silence, she stepped forward. Her voice came low, steady, carrying more power than his entire tantrum. You're nothing but a coward hiding behind power. The words sliced through the room like a blade through silk. Every whisper, every shuffle, every frantic scribble of a pen came to a halt. The insult landed with surgical precision, sharp, cold, devastating. Trump froze, his mouth hanging open mid-snarl, as if his body had forgotten how to continue the performance. The chamber erupted, gasps, shouts, nervous laughter, all colliding into a storm of noise. It was no longer just a hearing, it was history unfolding in real time. Reporters typed with such speed that the sound resembled hail against glass. Crockett calls president a coward. Headlines were already being drafted before the words had even finished leaving her lips. Trump tried to recover, his face flaming red, his words tumbling out in broken fragments. You can't. But Jasmine cut in again, sharper, louder, merciless. Look at you, she said, her finger stabbing the air toward him. Red-faced, screaming, breaking down in front of the world. This is the man who claims he can't be beaten? This is the man who hides behind a title, who thinks shouting makes him strong? The only thing your tantrum proves is that you're afraid. The audience roared again, half in disbelief, half in exhilaration. The tension was unbearable, like standing on the edge of a cliff, watching stones crumble beneath your feet. Trump gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, spit flying from his mouth as he tried to shout over her. Shut up! Shut your damn mouth! But his words only fueled her fire. You want me silent? Jasmine shot back, her voice rising now, firm as steel. Then you'll have to silence the truth itself. And you can't. You've built your career on drowning others out. But not today. Not with me. The chamber shook with noise, the judge's gavel pounding again and again in vain, as if the wooden handle itself feared it would splinter from the futility. In that moment, the spectacle transcended politics. It became primal, a duel of wills, rage against resolve, power against truth. The world was no longer asking what was happening. They were asking how far it would go. Every television, every live stream, every feed lit up with the same image. Trump, fists clenched, shaking with fury. Jasmine steady, sharp, unyielding, her words cutting deeper than any blade. And when she spoke again, the room fell back into that tense electric hush. You think power makes you untouchable, she said softly, almost like a confession whispered into the storm. But today proves power can break, and yours is breaking, right here, right now. Trump's face twitched. A tremor ran across his jaw. The mask of invincibility was no longer cracking. It was shattering. The chamber buzzed, a living thing, feeding on the spectacle. Whispers turned to shouts, shouts to chants, the noise swelling into something uncontrollable. And in that chaos, the image was seared into history, the once unshakable president losing his grip, while his opponent, the so-called warrior of justice, stood tall, unflinching, and merciless. The explosion in session was not just noise, it was revelation, and the world would never forget it. But Trump refused to let the moment end with his humiliation. His hands, still trembling with rage, dove beneath the desk and emerged gripping a thick folder stamped with bold, unmistakable red ink. Top secret. Gas shot through the chamber. Reporters lurched forward in their seats, cameras clicking wildly, lenses zooming in to catch every movement. Trump slammed the folder onto the desk and flung it open, papers scattering like shards of glass. "You think you've won?" he shouted, his voice cracking, but still laced with venom. "You think you can stand here and shame me? Let me show you what I've got on you, Jasmine. Let's see how tough you sound when the world sees this." He snatched a page, holding it high like a sword. "Classified intel, proof, evidence that you've been compromised, that you're nothing but a fraud propped up by lies. You don't belong here. You're a disgrace to this country." The chamber ignited into chaos. Voices collided, some cheering, some horrified, some demanding order. The judge's gavel pounded, but the frenzy could not be contained. For a moment, Trump looked reborn, his chest puffed, his face glowing with the intoxication of power reclaimed. He waved the document like a flag of conquest, daring Jasmine to deny it. "Go on," he sneered, the corners of his mouth curling. "Tell the world this isn't you. Tell them these words, these signatures, aren't yours. Let's see you squirm." The crowd leaned in, breathless, waiting for her collapse. But Jasmine didn't collapse. She didn't even waver. Instead, she stepped closer, her heels striking the floor with deliberate, echoing taps that carved silence through the noise. Her eyes locked on the document, scanning it with the swiftness of a hawk. And then she smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was sharp, mocking, the kind of smile that promises destruction. "That's your ace?" she asked, her voice cutting across the chamber like ice. "That's the bombshell you've been hiding?" Trump's smirk faltered. The certainty in his stance quivered, if only for a second. Jasmine reached out and, without asking, plucked the document straight from his hand. The audacity alone drew gasps, as if she had snatched the crown from a king. She raised the page, tilting it toward the cameras, ensuring the press captured every line. And then her voice rang out, steady, merciless. "This isn't my disgrace, Mr. Trump. It's yours." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Confusion swept across the chamber, eyes darting from her to him, waiting for the revelation. Jasmine tapped the paper with her finger, her tone dripping with disdain. "Here it is in black and white. Funding trails, dates, signatures. You thought flashing this would bury me, but all it does is prove the rot in your own empire. Money funneled through shell companies, favors exchanged for silence, bribes disguised as donations. You've just handed me your confession." The room detonated. Gasps, shouts, frantic scribbling. Every reporter knew they had just witnessed history. The so-called weapon had turned into the noose tightening around his own neck. Trump lunged forward, his voice breaking with panic. "That's a lie. You're twisting it. This doesn't mean—" But Jasmine didn't let him finish. "Oh, it means exactly what it shows," she snapped, holding the paper high like a torch. "And the best part? You brought it here. You revealed it. In your arrogance, in your desperation to crush me, you exposed yourself." Her words struck like hammer blows. Trump's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. The chamber fell into a stunned hush, every eye drinking in the sight of a titan silenced by his own hand. And then Jasmine leaned in, her voice dropping low, dripping venom. "Next time you want to humiliate me, Mr. Trump, make sure you don't load the gun with bullets aimed at your own chest." The chamber erupted. Laughter, applause, disbelief. It all crashed together, a tidal wave of sound that washed over the hearing like a storm. The press went feral, cameras snapping, headlines already forming. Trump's secret files backfire, and at the center of it stood Jasmine, unflinching, relentless, her words still echoing like fire through the chamber. For the first time in his career, Donald Trump was left choking on silence. But Jasmine Crockett was not about to let that silence fade into the shadows. She raised the folder higher, the words "top secret" gleaming under the harsh lights like a brand of shame. "Let the world see," she declared, her voice booming across the chamber. "No more whispers. No more cover-ups. Every page of this file is a blade of truth, and today, I will use them all." The crowd held its breath. Every camera tightened its focus. Every pen scratched harder against notepads. Jasmine snapped the folder wide open and began pulling page after page, holding them up one by one like pieces of damning scripture. Page 17. Fund transfers disguised as charitable donations, straight from foreign interests into your own pockets, Mr. Trump. Gasps broke through the silence, sharp and collective. Page 42, memos instructing subordinates to bury inconvenient evidence, to shred accountability and replace it with your lies. The chamber rattled as murmurs grew louder, journalists barely able to keep up with the storm of revelations. Page 89, proof of pressure campaigns on allies, demands cloaked as favors, threats written in ink you thought would never see daylight. But it's here, and now the people know. Every word hit like a hammer. Every revelation burned hotter than fire. Trump's face flushed crimson. He lurched forward, spittle flying as he bellowed, "Lies! All lies! You're nothing but a filthy liar!" His fist slammed against the table, the sound echoing like gunshots in the chamber. "You have no honor! No right! No!" But the more he screamed, the smaller he looked. Each vulgar outburst stripped another layer from the image he fought so desperately to maintain. The mask of strength was cracking, revealing not a titan, but a cornered man clawing for survival. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her voice cut clean through his storm, calm yet merciless. "Mr. Trump, every time you shout, you prove exactly what I've been saying. You think volume is power, but all it reveals is fear. And right now, the only thing louder than your screaming is the truth you can't escape." The audience erupted, some cheering, others jeering, all consumed by the spectacle of power collapsing in real time. The chamber no longer felt like a hearing. It felt like an arena, and Jasmine was wielding truth as her weapon of choice. Trump tried again, his voice hoarse but defiant. "You're a disgrace. You're unfit. Nobody believes you. Nobody." Jasmine slammed another page onto the desk with a force that made the microphones crackle. "Then let them decide," she thundered. "Let the American people look at these documents and see whose disgrace this really is. Because every page screams one thing: corruption, deceit, betrayal, and your signature is all over it." The words hit harder than any insult he could throw. Trump staggered back, sweat streaking down his temples, his lips trembling as if searching for words that had abandoned him. The reporters smelled blood. Cameras clicked like machine guns, immortalizing his downfall frame by frame. Commentators whispered frantically into microphones, broadcasting the implosion to millions watching live. The chamber vibrated with tension, a cocktail of fury, shock, and awe. Some members shouted for order, others shouted for justice, but the tide of noise refused to calm. Jasmine stood at the center of it all, immovable, her voice ringing with conviction. "You called me trash. You tried to bury me with your arrogance, your lies, your fake power. But trash doesn't burn, Mr. Trump. Truth does. And today the truth burns brighter than you could ever imagine." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, others screaming in protest. The noise surged like a tidal wave, crashing against walls that could barely contain it. Trump's mouth moved, unleashing more curses, more venom. But they no longer carried weight. They no longer pierced the storm. He was a man unraveling in front of the world, and Jasmine Crockett was the one pulling at the threads. As the shouts swelled and the cameras devoured every frame, one thing became undeniable. This was no longer just a clash of egos or a spat of politics. This was revelation. This was history in motion, and the fire of truth was consuming everything in its path. But Trump, cornered, humiliated, desperate, was not finished. He rose like a wounded beast, his voice cracking into a snarl. "You think you're some kind of hero?" He spat, jabbing his finger at Jasmine. "You're nothing. A loudmouth, a fraud, a disgrace to this chamber. You don't belong here. You never did. People like you never do." The words were poisoned, laced with venom meant to cut deeper than any fact ever could. He leaned closer, his face twisted with rage. "I could crush your career in a second. I could ruin you. You're a nobody standing against a president. Do you hear me? A president." Gas rippled across the room. The insults were no longer political. They were personal, vicious, raw. It was Trump stripped of all restraint, claws bared, lashing at the one person who refused to bow. Jasmine didn't flinch, not when the insults flew, not when the threats thundered. Instead, she rose slowly from her seat, her eyes never leaving his. The room stilled, as if the air itself waited for her response. She raised her arm, her finger pointing directly at him, sharp as a blade. Her voice roared, not trembling, not uncertain, but booming like a storm. "Justice will crush you." The words echoed, bouncing against every wall, rattling through every microphone. They fell heavy, undeniable, like thunder rolling across a battlefield. Trump's face froze, his mouth hanging open mid-snarl. For a second, the great showman had no line, no comeback, no mask. Jasmine stepped forward, her stance unyielding. "Every lie you've spoken, every insult you've hurled, every abuse of power you thought would never be exposed, it all ends here. Not because I say so, but because truth says so, because justice says so." The chamber erupted, not with chaos this time, but with a raw, electric energy that seemed to ignite the very air. Some shouted in fury, others in awe, but no one remained untouched by the storm unfolding before them. Trump tried again, voice cracking, fury spilling unchecked. "You're finished. You're done. Nobody will remember you. Nobody will care. You'll go down as nothing but trash." Jasmine's eyes blazed. "Then let me be trash that burned your empire to ashes." The audience gasped, then roared. The words sliced clean through his tirade, turning his insult into a crown upon her head. Every sentence now flew like arrows, every syllable sharpened by conviction. She rained down words not just on Trump, but on the very idea of corruption, deceit, and tyranny. "You think fear is power. You think cruelty is leadership. But power without truth is hollow, and cruelty without justice is nothing but cowardice. You stand here screaming at me because deep down you know justice does not fear you. Justice is bigger than you, and justice will win." The chamber shook. Reporters' pens could barely keep up. The crowd shouted over itself, torn between rage and awe, between defending a president and witnessing his unraveling. Trump slammed his fists again, his face drenched in sweat, words dissolving into hoarse shrieks. "Shut up! Shut up! You don't get to talk to me like that." But Jasmine's voice only grew stronger. "You told the world I was nothing. You told me I was trash. But look around you, Mr. Trump. Who is trembling now? Who is drowning in his own screams? Not me, not the people. It's you. And the louder you shout, the clearer it becomes. Your empire is cracking, and you can't stop it." Her words struck like lightning. Every camera lens magnified his collapse. Every microphone carried his downfall into living rooms across the nation. The once unbreakable image of the president was now fractured, scattered in pieces across the chamber floor. And Jasmine Crockett, steady as steel, was the one holding the hammer. The air itself felt like fire, burning with the clash of voices, the weight of history being carved in real time. No retreat, no surrender. This was not just an argument. This was war in words, and justice had just unleashed its deadliest weapon. But Jasmine Crockett was not done. She had saved her sharpest blade for last. With a calmness that contrasted the storm raging around her, she reached into her folder once more. Her hand trembled, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of what she carried. "This," she declared, holding a final sheet aloft, "is the evidence you cannot escape. Not with your shouts, not with your insults, not even with the title of president strapped to your chest. Asharanam." The paper fluttered in the air, a simple page, but heavy with the gravity of truth. "Here it is," Jasmine continued, her voice steady, amplified by the silence that now blanketed the chamber. "Direct proof of your signature, your orders, your betrayal, carved into ink that will outlive every excuse you try to scream." Trump lunged forward, his voice exploding like a cannon. "Fake! Fabricated! She's making this up! This is treason! This is—" But every word, every syllable, only betrayed his desperation. The more he screamed, the smaller he appeared. The more he raged, the more the paper in Jasmine's hand gleamed with quiet, unshakable power. The chamber buzzed. Reporters leaning forward, lawmakers frozen in their seats, citizens across the nation glued to their screens. Jasmine did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words cut sharper than any scream. "This is your handwriting, your seal, your corruption laid bare for all to see. And no tantrum, no insult, no curse from your mouth can erase it. Trump's fist slammed against the table, his face contorting with fury. You don't get to do this to me. I am the president. I am the power here. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her finger pointing at him like the tip of a spear. You were never the power. You were the parasite feeding on it. And today the truth rips you off the bone. The room erupted with gas. Cameras snapped, flashes igniting the chamber like lightning strikes. Trump shouted again, his voice cracking under its own rage. You'll regret this. You'll regret this. Jasmine stepped closer, each word now a blade. No, Mr. Trump, the only regret here is yours. The regret of thinking you could drown justice with your lies. Her tone sharpened, every syllable biting. You called me trash. You tried to bury me under your arrogance. But look around you. Look at what's left of you. You're not untouchable. You're not invincible. You are exposed, broken, defeated. The tension reached its peak. Every heartbeat in the chamber seemed to pause, waiting for her final blow. Jasmine lifted the page one last time, her voice thundering across the room. This is the truth, and the truth doesn't whisper, it roars, it doesn't bow, it crushes. And today, Mr. Trump, it crushes you. Then she leaned in, her words laced with venom and finality, spitting them like fire. You're not a president. You're a fraud, a coward. And now, you're nothing. The chamber detonated. Thunderous applause broke out, rolling like an earthquake through the hall. Some stood on their feet, clapping with the force of conviction, others shouting in fierce approval. The air vibrated with the sound of justice celebrated, a roar that no gavel, no protest, no outburst could silence. Trump staggered backward, his face pale, his lips trembling. For once, there were no words, no insults, no comebacks, just silence, broken only by the relentless applause thundering around him. Jasmine lowered the page, her eyes steady, her voice quiet but carrying like a drumbeat of victory. It's over. The cameras captured it, the moment a titan fell, and a warrior of justice stood unbroken. And in that instant, history was not just written. It was seared into memory, carved into stone, echoed in the applause of a nation that had seen truth win its most ferocious battle. Trump lowered his head. For the first time in his public life, the man who had built an empire out of arrogance, noise, and bravado looked small. His face was pale, drained of its signature swagger. The crowd saw it, the slump of his shoulders, the trembling in his jaw. It was not just defeat, it was the unraveling of a persona. The cameras zoomed in, catching every crack, every second of his downfall. And then came the roar outside. Headlines flashed like lightning across the digital sky. Crockett destroys Trump in hearing of the century. Justice's new face. Jasmine Crockett burns the old guard. Trump silenced in front of the world. The nation was watching not just a political battle, but a cultural shift. Trump had walked into the chamber thinking he could dominate, intimidate, crush. Instead, he had been exposed, his words stripped of power, his weapons turned against him, his pride shattered into dust. And Jasmine stood there unyielding. She did not smile in triumph. She did not gloat. She simply stood tall, her gaze sharp as a blade, her eyes blazing with the fire of someone who had fought not for herself, but for something greater. The chamber erupted in whispers, gasps, murmurs. Reporters scribbled like their pens were on fire. Camera flashes painted the scene in bursts of white light. Jasmine's figure was immortalized in that instant, a symbol of resistance, of truth, of justice that would not bend. Trump tried to lift his head again, tried to summon the old bravado, but every attempt was weaker than the last. When he opened his mouth, no insults came. When he clenched his fist, no strength followed. He was a man gutted by the very system he thought he controlled. Jasmine's voice cut through the silence, steady and sharp. This is what happens when lies meet the weight of truth. Her words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. They carried a force that echoed louder than any scream. The audience leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. Trump's lips quivered, his face red with humiliation. But nothing came. The silence that followed him was louder than his loudest rally. The room was not his anymore. The stage belonged to her. And then the applause came. It started softly from the back, a single pair of hands clapping, then another, until the sound swelled into a thunderstorm of approval, reverberating through the chamber, through the cameras, out into the world. It was not just applause for a woman who had won an argument. It was applause for a reckoning, for justice tearing down a false king. Trump sank further into his chair, shrinking, disappearing. The man who had once commanded armies of followers now looked like a relic, an echo of bluster, an empty suit stripped of power. Jasmine stood, framed by the storm of clapping hands, and in that moment, she was no longer just Jasmine Crockett. She was the embodiment of something eternal: justice, truth, defiance against corruption and cruelty. Her posture was straight, unbroken, her presence magnetic. Every lens, every eye, every heart in that chamber knew they were witnessing history. The headlines the next day sealed it. Crockett crushes Trump. The fall of a villain. A new symbol of justice rises. Across the nation, her words were replayed, her stance dissected, her courage celebrated. Students quoted her. Activists invoked her. Journalists analyzed her tone like scripture. And Trump? He became the meme of defeat. His image, head bowed, eyes lost, circulated as the symbol of a crumbling empire. His allies whispered doubts. His enemies roared with triumph. His empire of intimidation was collapsing, brick by fragile brick. What once had been untouchable had been touched, crushed, shattered. The courtroom hearing was no longer just an event. It was a turning point, a line in history, a moment when a villain fell and a warrior of truth rose. And Jasmine Crockett, standing beneath the storm of applause, eyes burning like fire, was etched forever as the face of that moment. The chamber that once echoed with Trump's voice now carried only one name, repeated again and again, like a chant, like a promise. Crockett, Crockett, Crockett. The chamber doors opened, and Jasmine Crockett stepped out into the blinding light. It hit her like a wave. Thousands of voices, a sea of people gathered outside, their cheers erupting into the sky. Crockett, Crockett, Crockett. The chant rolled across the plaza like thunder, unstoppable, alive. Hands rose, banners waved, phones lit up like stars as they captured her every step. For them, she was no longer just a representative, no longer just a woman standing against a man. She was the storm that had broken the walls of fear, and they adored her for it. She raised her hand, not in arrogance, not in conquest, but in acknowledgement of the people whose eyes burned with belief. The roar that followed nearly shook the stone columns of the building behind her. Every lens, every microphone turned toward her. Reporters shoved forward, desperate to catch her words, her expression, the fire in her gaze. She did not speak, not yet. She let the crowd carry her, let the energy of their voices write the moment into eternity. And behind her, the door opened again. Donald Trump emerged. The sound changed instantly. The cheers twisted into jeers, into boos, into a chorus of fury. Fingers pointed, signs were raised, voices spat insults that pierced the air like knives. Shame! Liar! Coward! The man who once commanded arenas of adoration now walked into a storm of scorn. His face was stone, but the cracks showed. The downward glance, the clenched jaw, the stiff shuffle of his steps. He tried to wave it off, tried to summon the aura of defiance that once made crowds cheer. But every move only fed the outrage. Every gesture another spark to the fire of contempt. Cameras caught the contrast perfectly. Jasmine bathed in light, embraced by cheers. Trump smothered in shadows, drowned by boos. It was not just defeat. It was humiliation made public, played live before millions. And he knew it. Jasmine did not turn to look at him. She did not need to. The people's voices did the work. He was finished here. But she was only beginning. The streets outside the Capitol swelled with energy, as if the entire city had come alive. Strangers embraced. Cars honked in rhythm with chants. Headlines raced across screens. Crockett walks into history. Justice triumphs, Trump falls. The people have chosen their champion. And yet beneath the triumph, there was a weight. Jasmine felt it as she raised her eyes to the horizon. The truth that this battle, however monumental, was not the end. Trump was only one face of a larger beast. The system that had allowed him to rise, the structures of power, the entrenched corruption, the culture of fear and deceit, it all still loomed. Today was a victory, but tomorrow would demand another. Her breath caught, steadying herself against the tidal wave of emotion. She thought of those who had fought before her, who had shouted into silence, who had been crushed by the weight of indifference. This moment was theirs too, and the fight ahead would honor them. She finally raised the microphone that had been thrust into her hands. The noise died instantly, tens of thousands holding their breath, the world leaning in through every live feed. Her voice cut through the air, clear, unwavering. Today, truth stood its ground. Today, justice spoke louder than lies. But hear me, this is not the end. This is the beginning. We will not stop. We will not bend. And we will never again be silenced. The eruption of sound that followed was deafening. A roar of defiance, a cry of unity, a promise that the fire lit today would not be extinguished. And in the shadows, Trump slipped into a waiting car. Cameras followed, recording the image of a man once untouchable, now reduced to silence and retreat. His motorcade vanished into the distance, swallowed by the noise of a nation that had turned against him. But the echo of Jasmine's words remained. It would ripple across cities, across states, across continents. It would inspire, provoke, ignite. It would remind the world that justice could win, that the powerful could fall. The storm was over, but the echo after the storm was louder than the storm itself. And somewhere deep inside, everyone knew. This was not just a chapter. It was the opening of a new book. The war for justice had only just begun. If this battle shook you, don't just scroll. Hold it, share it. Let it spark a conversation that power would rather silence. Like, comment and send it to someone who still believes lies can't outlive truth. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every clash is stripped bare and no mask of power survives the light. Hit the bell, because the next storm isn't calm. It's fierce, it's unfiltered, and it might just change the way you see justice. This is a fictional dramatization built on echoes of real corruption, real courage, and the eternal war between truth and power. Any resemblance to actual people or events is intentional, symbolic, meant for reflection, meant to challenge. Thank you for watching. Remember, justice isn't given, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories.